Fantastic. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to this amazing, very, very exciting webinar on securing minds and the behavioral science of cognitive security. We are just getting started. People are flowing into the session. That's how we do it. Right at the beginning, there's all that flow, the time for people to get set up. No matter how advanced technology gets, it always takes a couple minutes for people to come in and join us at the beginning of the session. And so, as they're doing that, we'll just say our little bit of hellos to everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. It is your opportunity today to talk to some august experts. And for those of you who are joining us on the later feed, so that is in the podcast, or you're listening or watching us on YouTube, thank you so much for joining. Be sure to subscribe. We've got a series of very exciting webinars planned on the subject of cognitive security and advanced cybersecurity for today's era, brought to you by Morrow, which are really, really cool. So be sure to subscribe, and at a later date, you'll be able to join us, for a live one. Of course, join us for a live one. You'll be able to ask questions. And for those of you who are here with us live today, welcome. You're able to ask questions by pressing any of those, cute little buttons down there. There's, of course, a chat, and you can also join in with the Q&A. And if you've got a specific question, I invite you to press the question button, and that will actually put a question into the queue for us to address. And we'll be, getting to your questions throughout the conversation, but we'll also be monitoring the chat so you can interact with us however it is that makes you happy. But please do feel free to ask those questions. And even if you're joining us live today, be sure to subscribe. Make sure your name is on that great mailing list so that you can, find out everything it is that you need to know about cognitive security, the advanced frontiers of human behavior and system security. It's a really, really exciting time to be talking about this. As I remarked on our previous webinar, I've been around this space for quite some time. I remember I was an early employee at a company called Checkpoint Software. Some of you might remember it if you've been around the security business for a while. And back in the day, which was a long time ago, it was the mid 90s, which for some of us feels like yesterday, right? Some of us feels like a million years ago. We, at that point, were talking about how the vast majority of security violations, the vast majority of issues that befell corporations in the cybersecurity realm were human driven. And at that time, I think we were throwing around a stat, something like, 70% of all security violations were human driven. And one of the things that I remarked on, I'm an advisor to Morrow, and we'll tell you more about Morrow in a second. One of the things that I remarked on was that all these years later, we are still talking about the same thing. And while the stat representing the number of security incidents that are driven by otherwise well-meaning employees, might have shifted at 66%, 75%, 82%, whatever the numbers are that you're using, the numbers are still significant. They're still more than half. They still represent the major vector of threat and opportunity for bad actors in the corporate cybersecurity realm. And over the course of 30 years, think of all the technological advances that have occurred. And to some extent, and our esteemed panelists are going to share their perspective on this today, to some extent, how little progress we've made on the human factor side of the risk vectors that are associated with cybersecurity. So this is one of the most interesting things for all the things that we've accomplished in 3 decades. What have we accomplished here? How are things different? And they are indeed different. And the opportunities are different, and the way we address those things are different, and the psychology of them are different. And so that's why we've got this really, really exciting series, which today you're joining our second episode of that, which is called Securing Minds, the Behavioral Science of Cognitive Security. And it's brought to you by Morrow. And before we dive in, Morrow is a partner in cognitive security. Most security tools protect systems, but Morrow is really focused on protecting your workforce, making difficult decisions on the daily. Because the biggest risks today, like AI misuse, social engineering, don't just involve software, they involve people. It's really, really important that tools like Morrow exist to help security teams shift their emphasis to the human side of that, understanding behavior, the context to assess usage by use case, and the precision to craft AI crafted policies that intervene at the moment that risk emerges. And that shortening the distance between the time the risk occurs, a risk emerges, and the time people respond, and how we deal with that response time is an extremely important part of that risk profile. And we call that cognitive security, which is about shaping secure behaviors in the field of work. The result: stronger alignment between people and security, fewer incidents, and more freedom to innovate securely. Seek tomorrow and help your people become the strongest layer of defense. So well written, such a good promo, very, very core to what we're talking about today. Props to the Morrow team for a well written little promo. Okay, so we're so glad to be here. I'm Gabe Zickerman. I'm your host for today. I've written several books on the subject of gamification and behavioral engineering. Most of my work has gone into engineering human behavior, more on the engagement side, getting people to do more of the behaviors that they think they want to do rather than less of the behaviors that are negative. But I've got a particular lens on this topic, and I'm really here to moderate our incredible esteemed panelists for today. So I'll let them introduce themselves to you. Let's start with Dr. Karen Renaud. Hey, Karen.
Hi, thank you for inviting me, and it's lovely to be here. So I am an academic at the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow in Scotland. I trained as a computer scientist, and when cybersecurity became a thing, I started to realize this was an area I wanted to go into, and I very quickly realized that humans were being neglected initially anyway. And now we've started to understand that the value of the humans in the security perimeter. And there's more and more work for me to do, but I'm very interested in where cybersecurity and humans come together. And that's anywhere that I can improve that intersection is where I like to work. Thank you.
That's awesome. Awesome. Such a great set of experience and so exciting. And thank you for bringing the accents to today's webinar. It's always nice to have one. And our second guest, Dr. Matthew Canham. Hi, Matt.
Hello, Matthew Canham. I'm the Executive Director of the Cognitive Security Institute. We're a 501c3 nonprofit focused on doing research and training in the area of cognitive security. We're a community of over 500 professionals working in this space, both practitioners and researchers. My background is my PhD is in cognitive neuroscience from the University of California, Santa Barbara, where I also trained in human factors and human computer interaction. I got into security actually through kind of a roundabout way. On a whim, applied to become an FBI special agent after graduate school. Much to my surprise, they accepted me, and I spent about 8 years doing cyber investigations and also supporting investigations from headquarters. Left a few years ago and went into consulting and went back into academia for a little while, where I was part of the University of Central Florida's behavioral cybersecurity program, and my work there focused on high-risk users, specifically what I call repeat clickers, people who habitually fail phishing simulations, not once, twice, but in some cases 20 out of 20 times in a one-year period.
Gosh.
Also did some work on insider threat and also synthetic media, social engineering, aka deep fakes, and that sort of thing. But now I am trying to fight this battle from the side of building community through the Cognitive Security Institute. Very happy to be here today. Thank you.
No, thank you for being here. Any special, what was your favorite FBI swag? Or can you talk about that? Did you ever get a really cool FBI item?
Yeah. Well, yes, I got a challenge coin from the behavioral analysis unit for support to the cyber behavioral analysis center on a case that they were working on. So that was the coolest piece of swag I got.
That's very cool. I'll send you my address. You can send that to me anytime if you're ready to part with your challenge coin. So actually, no, if you don't mind, Matt, I wanted to actually start with you. So you've thrown around the word cognitive security. We've all thrown it around. Can you give me a sense from your perspective? What does that actually mean? What does that phrase
Right.
mean?
Well, it's it's a tough it's a tough phrase to really pin down because I think we're still working on the definition of this. I will say I'm somewhat biased because in my PhD, it was a very much cognitive science focused PhD, meaning that it wasn't exclusively focused on humans. And so when I think of cognition, I'm thinking of cognitive systems, not necessarily humans. I think this becomes more obvious when we start talking about LLMs and AI agents. But you had mentioned earlier systems security. And I think something that we're going to see the quick evolution of is the integration of AI agents into workflows. So we're going to have human machine teams. And when we have human machine teams, we have to wonder or worry about what are these agents in that system loop doing. And when we start to think about examples where these agents are susceptible in several cases to the same types of social engineering attacks or similar social engineering attacks that humans are susceptible to. Now, I think we start to peel away the layers of what this thing, cognitive security, actually is. Because what we're doing is we're actually getting into manipulating that cognitive operating system. And so, the way I start to think about this is when you have an agent, you have an agent that has sensors, so ways to take in information from its environment, whatever that environment might be, and then it has a way to update its state or process that information, and it has a way to actuate on its environment. And so we can think of cognitive attacks as being something that disrupt any one of those points in the process. So that's my broad definition on cognitive security.
What about for you, Karen? How do you think of cognitive security?
Well, I have a slightly different take on this. Cognition is when I think deliberately and reflectively about something. But I think a lot of the time that people are clicking without thinking, they're using their automatic side of their brain that Kahneman talks about, the thinking fast part, where
Right.
they're not
System
actually
building.
thinking about what they're doing. They're in a hurry to go and have their lunch or to go home or whatever, and oh, email, click quickly. And so, yeah, I mean, Matt is obviously the expert when it comes to actual cognition with his background. But what I'm really interested in is how we help people to move away from that automatic part and actually engage with reflection so they can see that somebody's trying to scam them or fool them. So
Okay, I don't.
it's about thinking about the bigger picture of how the human brain works as opposed to AI.
Okay, so we'll get to the AI part because I think many people would say that AI is also thinking too fast a lot of the times. But so, Karen, just provocative question: how do we do that? How do we get people to think slower in those moments?
So uh, it's a guy called George Finney who wrote an amazing book called Well Aware.
Hmm.
And he actually, I mean, Matt probably knows him, and he said that what you'd have to do is, especially when, because the biggest vector is phishing. So what you've got to do is try and get people to take that step back and just think about what they're doing. And he said he told all the people at his institution where he works to say, slow down and frown. And the minute they had that sign all over the show and people learned to slow down and frown, it took them from the automatic to the reflective, and they had massive success in that. And somebody right, I'm sorry, I've forgotten his first name. He did some other work with also, they talk about mindfulness, which is basically the same thing of just getting people to just take a pause, breathe deeply, slow down, and then that switches. And we need to give people these tools. I have this particular issue with calling people the big enemy or stupid or things like that. They're not. That's how our brain is designed to function. So, but if you give people the tools, they are mostly very well intentioned and want not to fall for that fish. So if you just give them those tools, they probably do what you ask them to do.
So just to kind of go with that provocation for slow down and frown is very funny. I'm going to put a link to the book in here because it actually is a good resource. But slow down and frown is a great provocation. Do you think that some organizations, let's call them less responsive ones, I just thought of a government in my just a government thing manifest in my head, like the DMV, as we would say here in the US, right? Are organizations that are less customer service oriented or less responsive or historically less responsive, do you think their from your perspective, are they better primed as people to be able to do this, or do you think the cognitive flaws are the same regardless of the organizational pressure?
I think we're all human. So it feels as if we're all going to be subject. And I don't know whether studies have been done, but it feels to me as if a Friday afternoon would be the time when people would be most likely to fall for stuff, just because that's when we're tired and we want to just go home and start enjoying our weekend. So I think, but my biggest problem is that we're always focusing on um, the fear-based thing that is very prevalent in cyber. If you go and look for cyber, they even have a cyber Halloween day or something. And this fear-based message all the time, making people fearful. What happens when you're afraid? We're evolutionarily, when you were afraid, so you could run away from the big lion that wanted to eat you. Now we
Yeah.
make people afraid, and that has the opposite effect because you're not reflective when you're afraid. All the blood goes to your hands and legs so you can run. So you're not able to reflect. So we've got to stop making people afraid and threatening them with sanctions if they fall for things. We've got to just bring them down to that reflective thing in a calm way by making it funny, because slow down and frown, people find that amusing, so they engage with it.
Yeah. Well, if you're right, because if you trigger that flight, fight, or fawn response in people, you're not going to
Yes.
get good cognition in that
Well,
moment.
that's the
So,
problem. Yeah, I
yeah,
mean, and that's our brain is very ancient. We're not
yeah.
very well equipped to deal with this kind of online deception. So we've
Some
got
of
to
us
work
are
with
more
that
ancient.
ancient brain.
Yeah,
No,
yeah. I'm
I'm
glad. I'm
talking
glad you
high
reckon.
thousands of years old.
Oh, okay, okay, not just this. But Matt, can you say more about that? Because you talked about phishing simulation. You brought that up right away. You've talked about government. Can you talk more about that, like kind of phishing simulation thread, and what you think about that as a mechanism here? Because it's a popular tool for this, right?
Absolutely. Well, one thing I will say is kind of coming back to the system one, system two perspective. I agree
And will
wholeheartedly
you
with.
explain that? Just sorry to interrupt you, really
Yeah,
briefly, for
absolutely,
people that don't know.
absolutely.
You mentioned Kahneman and Karen, but just want everybody to know what we're talking about.
Well, so the idea behind System 1 and System 2 cognition is that System 1 is an older cognitive process that happens much faster and more automatically, and most likely induced or um, created by evolutionary forces. Whereas the System 2 process, as Karen mentioned, is more reflective. It's what we feel when we're actually hearing that inner dialogue in our minds. So it's much slower, it's more reflective, and very consciously driven. Um, the point at which I think I would push back a little bit is I think that there's a misconception that everything that happens to someone in cyber or in cyberspace bad is a result of system one, and that if we only resorted to system two or reflective, we would be all much better. Where I disagree with that is I've seen plenty of narrative attacks that actually play into the reflective side of
Mm,
cognition and
mm,
use that as a way to exploit that target. And where I think this becomes really important for security, and I think this is one of the potential shortcomings of phishing simulations is that um, we sort of drive users into this mentality of if I don't click the link or if I don't download the attachment, I'm fine. But now with generative AI, in fact, this is something I'm playing around with in my research right now, is catfishing. So if I can engage somebody like a CEO or C-level employee in an organization in a dialogue, and if I, as the attacker, am really not investing any time or money into this because it's an AI agent that's driving this, I can then sway that person over 6 months period of time.
mm.
And what we're doing right now is we're actually using prompt engineering and graph rag systems to drive people in certain directions based on their own narrative frame. So they're very much in this reflective system two sort of cognition, but we play into that and start moving them in directions that we want to move them in.
That's a good
So
point.
So wait, what is it? What do you mean by that specifically? You're saying that that attackers are creating AI agents that engage in long-term
Yeah.
relationship building
Yeah.
with people?
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And so then it's just a matter of putting a, decision tree on the backside of that to
Hmm.
understand where the vulnerabilities lie and how to start moving them towards those to the places that you want. So imagine a future in which we engage your CISO on, in a dialogue, and 6 months later we convince that CISO CISO that that your organization's actually evil and that maybe they should become an insider threat, because that's a future that we're moving towards very quickly. And it's not unheard of. I know I've worked with energy companies that have had activists inside their own organization who
Hmm.
deliberately became employees because they intended to become insider threats. It's not a far leap to go from that to engaging somebody in dialogue and trying to
Hmm.
persuade them in that direction.
Hmm.
So do you think, Karen, then in this context, like certainly just building off what Matthew was just talking about,
Hmm.
in this context though, do you think that how do we mitigate the risk of an antagonistic relationship where everybody sees everybody as a possible threat in this environment? Because that certainly sounds like a
Yeah. The AI, of course, has
vision.
changed the whole game, and that is why we've got organizations need to respond to these kinds of threats. So we I wrote a paper recently with some folks, and what we suggested was that all employees now need to be part of the defense, bring them into a room and say, okay, guys, here are the kinds of techniques that AI is developing. How could we as an organization resist this? Either I have a buddy that I can speak to about something that's developing, but where we all become, the community needs to be working together, because up to now, cyber has been a very solo game. We all got trained to resist the predictable kind of phishing attacks, but you did it by yourself. But now, I mean, we have to start working as a community where people support each other in spotting these kinds. Because I think, Matthew, if somebody's engaging in that and you had somebody to speak to about it, they could go, hang on, somebody's trying to turn you. Let's try and help you go through this. Um, so I feel like this movement from solo to community has come now.
This is a difficult area, though, generally speaking, if there is some kind of penalty associated with making errors, though, right? Because
Uh-huh.
if
Uh-huh.
people in an organization are at risk of, let's say, being penalized for making a bad decision,
Yeah.
then the odds that they will surface that they might have made a bad decision go down pretty significantly, right? It's a
Hmm.
lesson from aviation safety, early days in aviation safety, about removing
Yes.
penalty, right?
Yes.
So can you talk to a little bit how we might rethink that penalty model, Karen? So are there ideas
Yeah,
for how
so
we
so
approach that?
we've written about this. We're learning basically from the safety field, because in safety, the people are encouraged to report near misses. We don't do that in cyber. We just go, didn't fall for that one. Just keep it really quiet so nobody knows.
Right.
But in safety, people are not punished for honest mistakes. Um, and so we're going to have to start learning from these fields that are much older than we are, because as you're absolutely right. It's people that I've spoken to, CISOs that I've spoken to that are very successful, are the ones that say to people, if you have clicked, please tell me as quickly as possible so that I can quickly start doing something. I will not get angry with you. Just please, and he said he's actually encouraged people now. And then they say, I think I've clicked on something. He goes, thank you so much for telling me. Just tell me exactly what you've done and I'll try and fix it. So he said, by just removing all sanction and all censure, now people come to him and he's got, the phishing success down to a minimum. The one guy told me the story. He said that when he went on leave for a week, they had a successful phishing attack. And the boss said, right, that's it. You're never allowed to go on leave again, or you've got to get somebody to stand in for you, because having somebody there that people trusted to speak to meant that they could pull a stop to things really quickly. When he was away, they didn't have anybody. So this once again speaks to having trust, being unafraid to tell that, oh gosh, I clicked on something I shouldn't have, or I did something wrong. Can you please help? But the fear-based messaging and the censuring, that you're absolutely right, has been there, of people calling other people stupid and lazy. That has not helped our field at all.
Can I?
Yeah.
Trust is just to piggyback off of what Karen was just saying. Trust is so key to all of this because I've actually I interviewed an employee one time whose supervisor would have her go and talk to the security department anytime that the supervisor had a question because the supervisor was afraid of looking uninformed or stupid or what have you, and so they would send them off to go talk to the security department. And by having that open dialogue and, like you said, the removing the penalty from the near misses, one of the things I think there's a lot of value from that can be derived from that is that um, in the example I gave with the catfishing, chances are, if that campaign is directed against one employee, there's probably 20 or 100 other employees of that same organization that are getting the same type of attack with a different pretext, so on and so
Mhm,
forth. And if we're afraid to have these open dialogues, we will miss that. And so employees need to absolutely be the sensors to detect these attacks as
mhm,
well.
mhm. That's a good
So
point.
yeah, so just from that, Matthew, actually, because you kind of brought this up about the AI vector, right? So what AI has effectively done, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm hearing. So what AI in this threat environment, certainly in catfishing and other kinds of phishing threats, what it's really done is brought the cost down, right, for experimenting with different kinds of exploits, right? It's really bringing that cost down. So that feels really heavy. That feels like a big insurmountable kind of mountain. And given the rewards for an attacker and the lower costs for an attacker, how should an organization be thinking about responding to that? And would love to hear you've worked with organizations that have very serious security issues, right? Whether it's DARPA, NIST, whatever. But I would love to hear your thoughts on how do you even approach the cognitive side of that? Because one thing, like, let's get a bunch of people in the room, but by the time the meeting is ended, for the people in the room, 27 new attack vectors have been attempted. So what are we doing here?
Well, and this is where I'd love to hear Karen's input on this as well, because I think we have, somewhat similar backgrounds. But um, what I'm starting to shift towards is simulation, because by the time that the attack has happened, it's already happened and the damage has probably already been done. But we spoke at Black Hat 2 weeks ago about digital twins, human digital twins, and this is something that we're beginning to explore much more of. Can we can we create digital facsimiles of humans and then use those basically to battle test? And so this works both ways, right? So you can think about the red or the offensive side, building a digital twin of a target and then practicing social engineering, different social engineering attempts at that target, not once, twice, but hundreds of thousands of times in a Monte Carlo type situation in which you get a distribution of the most probable likely attack vectors, right? The
Right.
most likely for success. But you can turn around and you can think about that on the blue side as well, and defensively start to map out where are the most likely attack vectors and how can we shore up against those. And I think how this is going to change training and other interventions is that, number one, because, like you said, the cost has come down tremendously on very sophisticated attacks. And so one of the things I do is I look at phishing emails just well, I'll confess, I look at phishing emails for fun. I just, I enjoy looking at these things and seeing the progression. And a phishing email from 2013 is just comically juvenile compared to today.
Sure.
Today, it's becoming less common that there's a malicious link per se in there. It's becoming more common for adversaries to try to direct you to a site without putting a link in there or putting an
Mhm.
attachment, because those are the things that filters detect.
That's right.
Right.
So, and so I think one of the ways that training is really going to have to change is to teach people how to identify these cues and to understand that the filters may not always catch something that is malicious, because on the other side of this, we have an adversary now aided by AI that is deliberately trying to circumvent the
Mhm.
filters. So that would be my take on it.
Yeah, yeah, that's fascinating.
And what about from your perspective, Karen? What do you think about
So
how
yeah,
that how you might think of that through the cognitive lens?
so I can't really add to what Matt's doing because that just sounds really cool. What my perspective lately has been to look at the kind of leadership we're giving people in cyber, the cybersecurity leaders. Um, Up to now, it's been compliance. It's been we write a policy,
Yeah.
we make sure people know what to do, and we focus on making them comply. That era is gone, but not everybody has realized that yet, because compliance only works when the policy is reflective of the threats. But the threats are changing by the day. Therefore, the policies are outdated the day the ink is dry.
Mm.
So what we have to do, so Maxwell came up with 5 levels of leadership. The bottom level is the level where compliance is. We need to go to the top level, which is pinnacle. Pinnacle says we take everybody with us. We inspire people to be able to do the things we want them to do. So you make sure that you are there. People don't even know you're leading them if you do it well, but you make sure that everybody knows how to be lifelong learners, how to match wits with whatever adversary is out there, because compliance is not going to do it anymore.
I love that. That's a really really good segue to, just want to remind you, if you're just joining us or here, just joining us in this conversation, or you've popped in, we're talking with Dr. Karen Renaud and Dr. Matthew Canham. This is Securing Minds, the behavioral science of cognitive security. I'm your host, Gabe Zickerman. We are sponsored by Morrow, and Mara wants you to know that AI powered attackers exploit cognitive blind spots, which we've been talking about today. So very, very thematic, eroding our ability to trust what's real and what's not. You shouldn't have to have a security expert to make sure that secure choices are being made at all times. What if you had a personal guardian or a cognitive security agent always watching your back, whether that's you or your organization? And with Morrow, you do. Morrow guides secure decision making in real time without getting in the way of your work or play. Whether you're experimenting with a new AI tool or being bombarded with messages from someone in the uncanny valley, Morrow reduces the cognitive load of security to zero. No more over reliance on training or simulations. We'll talk more about that. Customers experience fewer incidents while employees gain the psychological safety to take the lead on security. That's the power of cognitive security. If you want to learn more, you can reach out to schedule a quick walkthrough with the Morrow folks. Links tomorrow will be in the show notes. Um, just to kind of move from that sort of kind of conversation, because we were just sort of talking about it, Karen, at the end. I know that you've been working on. You mentioned that you're working on a new paper about cybersecurity leadership, and I know that's not yet out, but was curious whether or not you could share for us maybe one or two of kind of the big takeaways there, as cybersecurity leaders are thinking about this sort of new frontier in our what is real, what isn't real, policies no longer work environment.
Well, this is what we've been thinking was so Matt mentioned blue teams and red teams, but our idea is that we need purple teams. So we really need to bring staff into the room. Say, hey guys, there's this new everyone knows about AI, right? Here's this new thing. How do you think that AI could try to target you with what they can find out on the internet about you?
Mm.
How might they do it? Right. How do you think that you could kind of prevent that sort of attack on you? And you've got to regularly help people to understand how AI is developing, because it's mind-boggling how fast it's moving. So there's no more, you know, telling people they have to go and do cybersecurity training once a year, and it's an online sort of a course, and do a quiz at the end of it. It's just not going to fit the bill anymore. And I think this is where leaders have got their place. You know, if you go and look at all the old literature on leadership, when a leader does his job well, the people will say, we did this ourselves. They won't realize that the leader was there helping them to get there. The leaders don't pull, they don't sanction, but they move people slowly, and they kind of stand next to people and bring them with them. So I don't think there's been that much of that up to this point. But where we're really interested in, Matthew was talking about the old brain. We are essentially primates that have somehow learned how to speak, and we've advanced amazingly. That part of our brain is still very much there, and people do not like to be made afraid, and people do not like to be pushed around. And I don't know that we've really understood that in cyber yet, because we do a lot of that at this point.
Do you feel like, Matthew, in your work, do you feel like the CISO, as currently conceptualized, that role, do you think that that role is ready? Is it structured the right way? What would you do if you could wave a kind of magic wand about CISO training and CISO expertise at this moment, coming into this brave new world of security?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Um, I think the challenge that leadership always faces is the cost versus benefit, right? Is that you're, and just to be clear, most of the people I face are on that human risk side. So either security awareness or insider threat or, some derivative thereof. And these departments are constantly fighting for resources. But above that, you have the CISO who is looking at that relative to all of the other buckets that they need to put money in. I think I think one of the areas that's probably neglected right now is that I think that there I think that human risk is often framed uh, in a negative way. And what I mean by that is that there's sort of cost going out and not really a lot of benefit coming in. And
Right.
and I'm curious on Karen's perspective on this, but one of the things that has come out of a lot of the human factors research, and we see this in what do they call it? HROs, high resilience organizations, I think, is that when you do things, when you put in interventions that improve the operation of that human layer, you actually come out with performance boosts. And that's something I don't really see talked about very often in the security world. But when we're talking about bottom lines, wouldn't an organization want to come out with a more resilient, more productive, and effective workforce that is also more secure at the same time? And this is where I think things like usability and systems engineering can really help, both on the security side and on the performance side. And so coming back to this question of where does the CISO fit into all of that? I think that's where is that they need to consider how these things can actually benefit the organization as a whole, not just from the security side.
I think Matthew just said something, Karen, that triggered a thought for me, because you've done a lot of work on usability and a lot of
Yeah,
thinking about
yes,
usability in this space.
exactly.
Can you talk some more about how usability plays a role here, and what the
Well,
CISO
see,
should be thinking about
it's very
usability?
interesting. I've also been moving a lot towards inclusivity and accessibility as well.
Okay.
And something that Matt said there was, and what we've discovered was when you make security accessible, in other words, people who are blind, people who are deaf, can also use the secure systems, you improve it for everybody. And that's the same as what you're saying
Huh.
now. So we have to start looking at the bigger picture and not just um, kind of what we want people to do, where we're kind of moving from seeing people as adversaries, even our staff as adversaries sometimes, because I feel sorry for the CISOs, because if there's a breach, it's on them, or you didn't do awareness training properly. And I get totally, all the CISOs tell me they struggle to get money. So the organization wants cyber, but they're not entirely always willing to invest. But when we do improve their their um, their ability to manage the cyber risk, because it's scary for everybody, they will be more productive. because they're not worried all the time about this background worry all the time. And I wonder if that is a way to try and sell it to the people who hold the purse strings. And I think that's a really good idea to sell it slightly differently. Everyone buys insurance for fire. People will
Yeah.
buy insurance for theft. We don't have to do that sales job anymore. I imagine 100 years ago, people were struggling to sell that to companies. Now everybody does that. But maybe we haven't quite got to where organizations realize that cyber is just this, we're going to have to spend money on it, and that's the end of it. But
Well,
I do know that somebody was telling me that CISOs have a very high turnover just because it's such an incredibly tough job. They're not appreciated and they're blamed for everything.
there's
So
a
maybe
high,
we,
I would say from my perspective, there's a high degree of shame in this
yes,
whole
yes,
domain.
the space,
Everything in this domain is full of
exactly,
shame,
exactly, yes.
right? And we
We
know that
actually, I
high
actually, I've
shame.
actually written about shame. You probably saw my paper on shame.
Yeah,
Very
can you
interesting.
talk about it a little bit? Because
Yeah, I can. So,
shame is such a powerful
well,
negative
I was
motivator. Yeah.
interested. I was interested in understanding negative emotions that were coming to cyber. So I did some work with some Rosalind Searle and with Mark Dupois from the University of Washington. And what we wanted to find out what happened when people messed up in an organization. What was the response? And I felt like maybe people were getting shamed. But other people who worked with me said, no way, that's not happening. Anyway, we did a big survey and people they were getting screamed at, they were getting shamed in front of their peers. One organization wrote it on a board so everybody could see who'd clicked on the wrong thing. And it's unbelievably damaging. And what we discovered at the end of the day was that you turn somebody to an insider threat when you shame them because they're going to get the organization back. So it's a really damaging emotion that to incite in somebody.
Well, yes, and on the kind of might on the employee level, right? But even zooming out to the CISO level and to management and even to the organization level, there's shame all over
Yes,
every time there's a
yes,
big
yes,
leak or break. I mean, Matthew, you've worked with orgs that have a, have a political there are political ramifications for errors in their world. Can you talk about how you view those sorts of things in sort of leadership and talking about cognition?
I'm sorry, can you clarify the question a little bit?
It's sort of more like, so this sort of shame factor, the individual person doesn't want to be responsible, but right, but what happens when an organization, like at the level of a NIST or something, when there's like a major kind of incident that's occurring in organizations with political threat, um, there how the organization responds to the risk profile.
So are you talking about almost like on a public relations type of level or
Yeah, yeah,
okay.
like
Yeah.
when the yeah.
Well, and so something that I think is interesting that we're beginning to, well, eh, I want to caution this by just saying some of these things we're inferring what's happening because we don't have a chance to talk to the actual criminals and see if this is their intention. But there have been a few organizations I've spoken to in the last year where it seems like the criminals are buying shorts in their stocks right
Oh,
before a breach. And
okay.
so this is an example of how a threat actor might directly benefit from the
Hmm.
negative public response to a breach. And so this is something where I think it's somewhat neglected on the security side of things, but there is movement to shore this up, is crisis communications. And so there was the case, I forget the company, but shortly after the SEC ruling on disclosure of breach within, I think it's 72 hours, um, there was the ransomware group that breached the company and then reported them to the SEC. Um, when they failed to report within the prescribed time. And it kind of speaks more to the broader trend of, um, I think, eh, don't hold me to this, but I believe that the FBI or IC3 is moving towards extortion attacks and away from ransomware because the ransoming of the data is only that first iteration. The second iteration is that maybe they will release, unfavorable material. We saw this with Sony, for example, that some of the most damaging aspects of the Sony breach were actually leaked internal emails about different actors or producers and so on and so forth. But then also, selling that information or then creating a follow-on um, campaign of, a narrative attack. And so this is something where I think that the security industry is starting to awaken to this, but the narrative that goes around these attacks are very, very key. And bringing back, sort of the political side of this, something I expect to see probably over the next 4 years is more and more sorry,
A tough one.
politicization. I'm just going to
Politicization.
give
Yeah,
up on that one.
that's great.
Politicizing of attacks, and so
Sure.
um, Tesla, I think, is a great example of this, right? Where um, agree or disagree with Elon Musk and what he did with Doge and the whole situation there. Tesla was a company that he owned. Tesla, as a company, suffered because of the pushback on that. Um, I don't believe I know that there were a few cyber incidents that corresponded with the physical security incidents that happened on that, but that's a type of thing that I think we're going to see more of going forward.
Can I double click back from that to something that you talked about earlier? And I know that Karen, you also have a perspective, but just starting with you, Matthew, you talked about internal antagonists, people being turned against the company, for example, by a long-term exploit, but also potentially, people who are explicitly there to cause some kind of sort of harm or damage. How should we be thinking about that kind of relationship with with employees, that perhaps employees or agents or whatever, internal agents who become antagonistic towards the company? That feels like a whole other level of risk that we really haven't been thinking about very clearly. Maybe in the NatSec world they think about it, but in corporate life we don't think about too much.
Right. Well, let me just start off by saying that this is a mess. I mean, this is probably one of the messiest areas that we can get into, and the reason that I say that is, on the one hand, we just talked about trust, and now we're going to pivot and talk about zero trust, right?
Right. Yeah.
And I think Karen made an excellent point earlier when she was talking about shame and how you can actually create insider threats. And so Dr. Eric Shaw has a paper that is titled something like The Critical Path Model of Insider Threats. And the thing I love about the critical path model is it talks about having predispositions, and this is typically thought of as, personality predispositions, dark triad, and these kinds of things. However, in the case that I mentioned with the energy company, it was somebody who came into that company already knowing that their ideology was not compatible with the goals and missions of that company, right? So that was a predisposition. And then along the way, you have a triggering event. This could be, some sort of life stressor, a divorce, a death in the family, something that pushes that person over the edge or makes them more vulnerable. But then, most critically, and this comes back to Karen's point, is that you have harmful organizational interventions. And this is where maybe that person is reprimanded or, some sort of other, like they're put on the wall of shame, some other intervention that kind of pushes them over that little edge to then become an active malicious insider threat. And this is where employee assistance programs, I think, can be really, really helpful. Is if people have this sort of, I hate to say safe space, but really a safe space that they can go to and have open and frank conversations with a somewhat neutral third party. This is one of the outlets I think that can be had for that. Um, a speaker that we're going to have October 8th, I believe, at the Cognitive Security Institute will be Dr. Rick Lugo, who's going to be talking about mental health in cybersecurity. And one of the things specifically that he's going to talk about is how to spot in coworkers, distress, stress, and how to, properly intervene in those types of situations to help each other out. And yeah, so that's my first
Fascinating.
take on it. But this is an entirely a webinar in and of itself, I would say.
And I dropped a link for everybody to Shaw's critical pathway paper here in the chat, and it'll be it'll be in the show notes as well. Karen, what were you? Did you have any thoughts about this issue in terms of
Yes.
the?
So organization, you can't, you mentioned the people who join an organization specifically to hurt them or to steal their IP. These are ideologues or whatever they are, and they're coming in to do harm. I think the vast majority of your employees are not coming in to do harm, but you treat them badly, or, but it really a good point. I worked with some other folks on an insider threat taxonomy. And there are 7 types that we came up with, but one of them are called fallible. So the guy's having a divorce, or somebody drove into his car this morning, or he's just completely burnt out because he's been working too hard. There's all those things. So he makes a mistake. So now what are you going to do? You're going to punish the guy, you're going to sanction him. So it's about, yes, spotting those issues. All of us go through bad stuff in our lives. So it's about being supportive for that person so he doesn't switch by going, my father died, people treated me badly. Okay, I'm going to get you guys back now, because they have all the passwords. They know all the access paths. They can really hurt you if you treat them badly. But organizations who just go, okay, because you did something wrong, you were malicious, you're going to get punished. That's not going to play out well. It comes back to leadership, knowing your people, knowing what their needs are, and actually treating them like humans, not little robots that can be programmed to behave securely.
But it also sounds like maybe what Matthew's talking about. I'm curious on your thoughts on this too, Karen. Is that there might be like a psychological model for predicting
Mhm.
how users might fall into fallibility. Maybe there's other categories there in that taxonomy that are worth looking at, that we
Mhm.
might be able to derive from other kinds of behaviors or other circumstances around their lives as an employee. Like, do you think we could predict whether or not somebody might become more fallible?
So what Matthew just said was very interesting. It reminded me of nature versus nurture. Some people cope with stress really, really well, and other people just don't.
Right.
And how the organization brings their other part in, which is the nurturing part, maybe those two things have to come together to create a full-blown insider incident. And we're all so different, but we all need to be treated like people and not robots. So
We got plenty
yeah.
of robots coming at us.
Well, one of our categories, by the way, is called the disempowered, which are people who are hamstrung by rules that were created 10 years ago or 5 years ago by people who are still steeped in the old-fashioned fishing model. And so they're hampered by all these rules, and they can't spot the AI exploits, and they're not allowed to react in a way that would help.
Can I ask a kind of provocative behavioral question? I'm curious for both of your perspectives about this, because I think about this often. So, if you, I don't know if either of you have kids, but if you're a parent and you're out with your kids at let's say like a playground or something, they talk about that like kind of dad reflexes, or mom, kind of the mama bear reaction. You don't really need to train a parent on threat vectors necessarily. They perhaps tend to be, if anything, they tend to be overreactive to risks against their children, right? They don't have to sit and go to a training course that says, hey, watch your kids when they're playing on the swing set, for when they might lose their balance, or watch out if somebody's in the zone or another kid is threatening them or something like that. I'm curious about why it is that that comes naturally to us, but cybersecurity threats don't naturally provoke a kind of instinctive response in us.
Well,
You ever thought about that?
yeah, I'll
Those are my kids, right? That's different from the company's devices and information.
Is it because you don't care as much, or
No, I care, but not as deeply as I care about my own children.
so if you cared more, do you think it would come more naturally? Like, do you think it comes more naturally for an entrepreneur, let's say?
I think employment is a different contract. I'm sorry, but I'm speaking as a mother, so maybe
No,
Matt
no,
has a
I
more
want to hear it. I want to hear it. Yeah,
nuanced view.
yeah. What about you, Matthew?
well, so I'm sort of taking parentalism out of the equation here, and just I'm going to say that this is one of the things that differentiates terrestrial from digital space. It, digital space is all fabricated, right? So we can make it what we want to make it, and because of that, um, it doesn't present the same way that physical threats do, just by their nature. And I think I mean, that's the crux of what we're dealing with is,
Mhm.
we have millions of years of evolution driving our ability to perceive threats in the real world.
Mhm.
And the internet's been around for what, 30 years?
Yeah,
And so
And cyber for even less.
exactly. And by the way, if widespread metaverse adoption does end up happening at some point, this is only going to become, much, much worse. And also, I think another thing we need to consider is how the agentic layer is also going to impact this, right? Because I think what we're going to see is less and less direct engagement with the digital world and more engagement that is mediated between
an
by our
agent.
personal assistants, right?
Uh-huh.
And so now
Mhm.
you've got another layer of attack vectors sitting between you and everyone
Mhm.
else.
Mhm. Mhm.
Do you think that digital natives are better at this?
No, I
No, huh?
think they're
Interesting.
better at spotting certain
Mhm.
types of threats. But I think
Mhm.
other types of threats, um, they're probably somewhat naive to, just like
That's
every
exactly
generation.
that they're not afraid of technology the way elderly people are afraid, right? Because I mean, a lot of 80-year-olds today never used a computer at work,
Sure.
right? My parents had never used a computer at work. They were 82 years ago. So wow, but they're less afraid and they're braver to go out there. But we did a study with 12-year-old Scottish children and discovered that they were incredibly attuned to online bad intentioned actors, much better than I expected them to be. So wow,
Hmm.
they are on the ball, these kids. But also not the full range of, but they're a lot less gullible than we expected them to be.
Okay. Well, that's encouraging, right? As they enter the workforce,
Oh yeah.
perhaps brings us a different dynamic. So I want to ask, we're kind of coming to the end of the session. I wanted to ask each one of you sort of a question from your own experience. If you could make sort of one big recommendation, you can make one recommendation to, the CISOs of the world about what it is that you would have them do to change the threat landscape to really improve their cybersecurity, perspectives and outcomes. What is the one, if you could wave a magic wand, don't worry about resources, what is the one, main recommendation that you would make to the security leadership that you talk to? Do you want to, Matthew, do you want to start?
Sure. Um, we exist in the 21st century with 19th century organizational structures, and we need to change that. We can't rely on this top-down approach anymore. I I had a client that I was working with that was switching to a secure file sharing system that would only allow files to be transferred of a certain size, and there were CAD designers that needed to transfer files that were much larger than what this would allow for. So they were constantly violating policy, but they had no alternatives. And leadership needs to be receptive to the idea that top-down policy imposition is just not going to work anymore. That would be my one thing I would say.
Great. Karen?
Um, I would say that leaders need to think about how they can be aspirational rather than prescriptive.
Like a vision for the future that's more
Well, that's the difference
positive.
between leadership and management, because if you do basically a compliance-based approach to your employees, you're basically a manager. But when you become people-centered, you become aspirational. And I think that's where we need to drive towards.
I love that. Actually, I wanted to leave on that, but I just realized I had one follow-up question for you, Karen, if you'll just indulge me for one more minute. You talked about how accessibility improves security for everybody, and I did want to just double click on that. Could you please, I know we're shifting back to a previous question, but could you just explain to me a little bit how it helps? How does making security more accessible help everybody's security outcomes?
So, for example, I don't know if any of you are getting as frustrated with captures as I am. Because
Sure.
as I get older, I struggle more and more with the vision ones. So all of us would be a lot happier if they stopped forcing us to do captures, because what they're keeping out is the elderly and not everybody else. All of these if you have keep the more complex you make passwords, the more difficult it is for everybody. It doesn't matter how good your memory is, doesn't matter how good your vision is. So if you start understanding that we need different ways to allow people to get in by maybe sending them a magic link or something, then everybody who might have a bad day and they can't remember their password will be that will be eased. Their their experience will be much better than just for the older folks who might have memory issues.
I love that. I think that's also a very that's a very good usability thesis that has great impact on all levels of the
Yeah.
organization. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you
Okay.
to both of you, Dr. Karen Renaud, Dr. Matthew Canham. Thank you so much for joining us. How can people follow you, Matthew, if they want to follow your work or see what you're doing? Where would you like them to go?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn as well as the Cognitive Security Institute's LinkedIn page. And then you're also welcome to go to cognitivesecurity.institute. So the institute is the top level domain there. And we have ways for you to contact us there.
Fantastic. We'll drop those in the notes. And how about for you, Dr. Renaud?
I'm just at karenrenaud.com.
That's fantastic. Renaud for those of you
That's
listening.
right. Yes. Yes.
For those of you listening on the podcast. So, just one more word on Morrow. Morrow makes human risk factors visible, memorable, and measurable and shapeable. From surface level activity to the intent behind it, Morrow gives security teams the insight and tools to guide behavior before it leads to a breach. Very important. With fewer incidents, stronger policy enforcement, and a culture of secure decision making, Morrow doesn't just reduce risk, it unlocks momentum. Because when security aligns with how people work, teams move faster, build bolder, and explore new ideas without hesitation. And your workforce, they become your greatest asset, not your greatest risk. Ready to see how cognitive security works in practice? Get in touch and get started today. Fear nothing, explore freely. And when in doubt, seek Morrow. So thank you, Morrow, for bringing us together. Thank you for sponsoring this. You can, of course, sign up. Make sure that you subscribe to this podcast and the video cast if you're watching it on YouTube. We've got a great series of discussions just like this fantastic one on cognitive security coming at you throughout the rest of this year. I've been your host, Gabe Zickerman. You can also find me on LinkedIn. The last name is convoluted, but Gabe Zichermann usually gets you what you need. Thank you, Dr. Renaud. Thank you, Dr. Canham, for
Thank
joining us.
you.
And thanks everybody for being part of it. We'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay.